בליצר, איזה כיף שאתה פה.
Good to be here.
Good to be here. We're gonna get started in English.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, it's my first podcast, so thank you so much for inviting me.
Wait, what?
It's my first podcast interview. Yeah, I've never done this before, so
Yes!
yeah, I'm excited.
Yes, a Forbes exclusive.
Here we go.
I love it. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you for choosing me. And I'm really appreciative of the time and the energy, and we're just really excited to have a really fun conversation about cybersecurity and AI, entrepreneurship, enterprises, the Israeli ecosystem. We have so much to cover.
Yes.
How did you get into cybersecurity?
Wow, that's a good question. So, it's funny. I mean, in hindsight, it's really easy to sort of connect the dots, as Steve Jobs so eloquently put it. Like one decision sort of building on the last one. And there were always sort of a few themes that sort of were woven throughout. I think first and foremost, I think that this whole this construct sort of is there is a basis, and that basis, that axis is my family, right? I mean, my family, my parents, my lovely wife, my children, they instilled in me that, I would say, not just the moral compass, but also the type of values that I've been carrying with me throughout my career. So I think that the love of knowledge, being having that generalist curiosity, right, to explore different domains. I think that sort of stayed with me throughout that process, and I think that's what led, or at least led me to that domain in the first place. I think that the first time I was intrigued by cybersecurity was back in high school, right? As a teenager, I started my BA at the age of 13, and
as one does, of course.
and back in the day, I was really I was interested in a lot of things, but one could definitely define me as a poli-sci buff or international relations addict. And as someone who has been so interested in that topic, one cannot ignore the immense impact of cyberspace on international relations, right? As computerized systems, interconnected computerized systems became more powerful and more ubiquitous, and we as a modern society been heavily relying on those systems. The sort of potential that those systems encompass from business standpoint, but also from the adversary standpoint, from a malicious standpoint, also increased. So it was clear that because computerized systems, cyberspace is sort of the backbone of our modern society, that as the saying goes, if you build it, they will come, right? Malicious, nefarious actors will try to compromise it. So early on, I started to sort of, getting more, immersed in that sort of domain, getting a better sense of, how norms are being created in cyberspace, about different technologies that relate to cybersecurity. So I think that was like the starting point, and from there on, just one thing led to another, right? I mean,
so you actually started in political science?
Yeah. So my BA was in was management, political science, and international relations.
Interesting.
Yeah. So quite probably different sort of course.
No, I mean, I get
journey.
it. My mom was deputy attorney general here in Israel, and so international. I was in Model United Nations. In fact, this company, Clarity started in the backyard of my political science professor at Stanford, Larry Diamond Professor of Democracy. And one of the things that I was always looking for is how is cybersecurity and international relations going to be pieced together, because it seems quite fragmented, and the industry, most of the use cases don't seem to be originating in the construct of the international relations. But I think over time, especially with what we're seeing geopolitically and with the era of defense tech now, I think that this is going to be a huge, huge thing.
Yeah, and I mean, cyberspace has become, as some experts coined it back in the day, the fifth domain, like the operational domain, with sea, air, land, and space. That's where the wars and operations will be conducted, and it's even more. I mean, that
you say will be is because that they haven't been.
No,
yet?
I'm saying it from a standpoint of a 13 years old probably right now in terms of my professional trajectory. But yeah, I mean, no, of course there are cybersecurity, cyberspace more generally is. An integral part of our existence, and that also includes, of course, warfare and military operations. I would say that that cyberspace is even more pivotal due to the fact that it's not that one can operate in cyberspace in order to fulfill their goals and achieve their objectives, but all other operations on all other in any other domain are even more heavily reliant on cyberspace.
Absolutely.
Right. So in order to it doesn't matter what type of operation, what type of activity we're talking about, whether it's on the business front or on the national front, on an organizational front. It's the backbone of our society, and thus we need to understand how to leverage it for positive purposes, but also how to govern and secure it. It is not it's like any other type of technology. It could be used for both positive and negative objectives. It really depends on how you use it.
Yeah,
so.
And I think that the 13-year-old you thinking about the future of cyberspace and warfare and how that's going to be a significant piece. I actually think we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
We're seeing now the new Mission Impossible movies, the James Bond movies. They're depicting these zero-day attacks. There's a really cool show on Netflix, 0 Day, but with Robert De Niro, and talking about how what could happen in the cyberspace. And I think that we haven't yet reached mainstream consciousness as to what's possible. And I think that with the adoption of verticalized AI agents and how so many more of our systems are going to be vertically integrated with each other and horizontally integrated with each other, we're going to experience some really interesting things in this intersection of AI, government, international relations.
Well, I think that generally speaking, we as Israelis, we're very much, security minded, right? It's sort of baked into our DNA or our culture. But I think that your average Joe, your average consumer would always favor or prefer usability, productivity over security. So security for your average consumer would not be top of mind.
Yeah.
So I feel that we're getting to a point where security would be a differentiator, even from a business perspective. But again, in terms of the sort of our society, we're not there yet. It's always security is usually lagging behind technologies and technology investment, and usually regulation and compliance lags behind security. So that's just the way it is, right?
So you enlist in the IDF. Do you get a chance to work on cybersecurity in the context of the IDF?
So I think that ignore cyberspace, right? It's if you're serving in the intelligence corps, that's just an integral part of the work. Again, I can get into the specifics. I serve for 5.5 years in the military. In my last position, I served in the Prime Minister's office, working with the Prime Minister. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, it's so entrenched, it's so integrated into our life that that my engagement with cybersecurity and cyberspace sort of continued into my military service, and of course afterwards as well. So yeah, it was a sort of integral part of that as well.
Yeah, and so walk me through some of the remaining milestones, because you've gotten a chance to experience both the enterprise world, the investment world. Walk me through some of these big milestones.
Sure. So, well, first of all, I feel that there was always there was that usual frequent welcome that I got whenever I assumed a new role. It would usually go something like this: here are the keys. Welcome. You're probably 10 years younger than most of the people around you. We're not sure what our expectations, but you have to exceed those expectations, and please don't fuck up, because there are serious, whether it's national security, whether it's perhaps millions of dollars on the balance, and now you need to sort of earn your seat next to the table, and you need to quite quickly understand how can you generate real value for the relevant stakeholders, whoever that might be in that specific sort of professional environment. And I've experienced and worked, operated in the intersection of AI, enterprise software, and cybersecurity for over a decade or so, and most notably, if we'll go through the sort of that sequence, I was asked by the head of the National Cyber Bureau in the Prime Minister's office to join and actually establish the research unit within the bureau. So I did that for a couple of years. So was tasked with issues that relate to policy formation. I wrote the first draft of the Israel's international strategy in cyberspace, and then from there I was sort of asked to venture into new realms, and eventually part of my responsibility was to actually help Israeli cybersecurity companies to cooperate with customers, design partners from around the world, and vice versa, helping multinational corporations to tap into the Israeli ecosystem in cyberspace. So it was sort of a business development role, but just from a national perspective, right? So that was quite interesting, and I really enjoyed that. So that was like sort of my public sector experience, my governmental experience, and then from there I transitioned to the private sector for the first time. Joined a known venture capital fund called Glilot Capital Partners, an amazing fund. I think it was ranked back in the day as one of the top performing VCs in the world from their vintage. And I joined as a principal. I was the sole principal back in the day, leading the whole sourcing, due diligence processes end to end. Supporting entrepreneurs post investment. And so
it's a pretty sharp change from national and public sector to working now with sharp entrepreneurs running super fast. I mean, Glilot is it's one of the top VCs not only in Israel, in the world. Kobe is going to be here in a few days, and
amazing.
So and the portfolio is amazing. But it's a really fast, it's a really different environment.
Yeah, it is a very different environment. Definitely, I think there are a lot of common denominators. I would say there is to some extent there is some continuation here. Just due to the fact that in the Prime Minister's office, part of my job was industry facing, right? Part of my job was actually getting better acquainted with the Israeli ecosystem, dealing with or engaging with over 200 multinational corporations. So in order to do that and be of use for those entrepreneurs and for those executives, I had to really understand the technology stack in depth. And I had to understand, how do I discern between different types of technologies, like go, under the hood, beyond the marketing buzzwords, what actually differentiates one company and one solution from another. And that was, of course, very useful when I sort of joined Lilo, because that's the bread and butter of the venture capital work, right? It's differentiating between different technologies. It's identifying sort of possible indicators of success, possible product market fit, and so on. What are the tailwinds that could bring a company to their relevant milestones? I think what was important, that throughout time, the most important aspect was always the human element, right? It was about engaging the entrepreneurs, supporting the entrepreneurs that are doing the heavy lifting, right? And again, throughout my career, it was all about identifying like which team has the right, is complementary in nature, right? Where can I find the right team for that is, the best team for that specific endeavor? Where can I find team that has individuals that have the right grit and resolve and the ability to overcome challenges, right? I've just, there was a panel just yesterday, and I spoke about the fact that, it's usually quite far from those clean, meticulous storylines that VCs usually share after a successful exit. Usually people are less inclined to, share how the sausage is being made, right? It's usually very messy, and what you want to find is a team that can withstand that messiness, that can overcome those challenges, and find a way to keep on going until they reach their objectives. So so back to your question. Yeah, I mean, there are some concrete differences between working in the government and working in a venture capital fund, different KPIs, different objectives, but it's still, I've always tried to be as close as possible to the entrepreneurs, as close as possible to innovative technology, cutting edge, bleeding edge technology. So in many aspects, it was just a continuation of what I did prior.
Yeah. And then Citibank.
Yes.
So one of the leading banks in the world,
yes.
Right? Getting to work and I think that at least now as an entrepreneur, I get to really see how, cybersecurity, when there's new attack vectors and new attack methods, they impact a bunch of different industries. One of the first industries that is usually impacted is financial industry, because that's where the money is. And attackers, one of their key motivations is obviously to make money. In the context of our world of deepfakes, we see that money as a key motivator for maliciously using AI to impersonate people. And so I've been learning how banks really have been needing to augment and evolve themselves over the last 2 decades to deal not only with customer expectations of moving to a digital world, but how do you secure that digital world? And it's a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I think that generally speaking, CISOs, they have immense responsibility, but I think that in terms of their incentive, they don't want to be to hinder innovation. They don't want to be an inhibitor of innovation. They want to be a business enabler. I believe that the notion is that if you have really effective brakes, right, in your car, you can drive faster, right? So the issue is, how do you create a robust, robust safeguards, comprehensive strategy that allows you to secure your estate and your business in an effective manner. And we can talk about what that actually encompasses, because there's a lot of issues that relate to that. But at the same time, you need to remember that at the end, there are people out there, right? So you want to ensure that there is almost zero friction, that and to enable them to fulfill their jobs and their objective, because at the end, the business of this type of large organization is not cybersecurity. The business is to generate value to the stakeholders, and pursue other sort of economic objectives. Security is merely an enabler. So the question is, how do you sort of tread carefully? How do you tread lightly? And how do you strike a balance between the need to have very deep and robust and comprehensive security measures and controls, whilst allowing the business to operate properly? Now, in many cases, those two objectives align very well, but in many cases there are some contradictions, and the issue is, how do you strike that delicate balance between the two? And I think that when you're talking about a large enterprise, highly regulated enterprise that has branches all over the world, millions, hundreds of millions of customers, it's complicated. It's complicated. How do you do that in an effective manner? So that's the type of challenges that everyone who works in those type of organizations usually face on a daily basis. Yeah.
So cybersecurity landscape is very broad and it's very wide, and there's so many different categories. There's so many different things happening.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a few of them. What are ones that you're thinking to yourself, okay, wow, these are particularly interesting areas for me in cybersecurity?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, again, there's a lot of ground to cover here, right?
Yeah.
And we can go one by one. I think that we must, of course, start with the impact of AI, large language models, and other types of technology that could be sort of broadly categorized as
Let's
AI.
talk about their impact. Yeah.
Yeah. So I believe that we are. So you know what? Let's take a step backward. So if we had recorded this this interview 2 years back, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I would probably delve into the intersection of AI and cybersecurity, and I would have probably explained about those two streams, right, that have been created. Like the one stream focusing on how AI could be leveraged for cybersecurity purposes, right? Whether it's for anti-phishing, right, or better incident triage, or I don't know,
automatic SOC analysts.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
So many use cases. The reason why this is such a meaningful stream is because cybersecurity in many cases is basically a data problem.
Yes.
And AI systems, and of course large language models are very are well poised, or are equipped to sort of parse complex data sets and uncover lots of vulnerabilities, misalignments, sort of elusive patterns that are integral for our cybersecurity work. So, of course, AI has sort of become, again, the backbone of cybersecurity, and it was, again, 3 years ago, you couldn't find a company that doesn't rely to some extent on AI technology. And then there was the other stream, which is how do we secure those AI systems, right? Whether it's the models themselves, right? In runtime, how do you defend against prompt injections? How do you protect the data sets from data poisoning? How do you protect the development life cycle and the supply and the supply chain? There were lots of issues to consider, and there still are. Now, I feel that some of those things are to some extent obsolete. Now, I'm not saying that all those topics or all those challenges have been addressed and are now fully mitigated. On the contrary, I just think that we have to realize that we are in midst of a tectonic change. And what I mean by that is that we are moving from a world where the scarce resource, right, that companies or nations have been seeking was intelligence, right, or knowledge. And we're moving to a world where intelligence and knowledge is, quite a commodity to some extent. And now we're facing a reality where the new scarce resource is not knowledge or it's not necessarily knowledge or intelligence, but it's actually agency. So humanity's sort of new mission, I would presume, would be to embed agency broadly across the board. And now the question is, how do we leverage that agency autonomy to our advantage in cybersecurity? How can we produce and form better products, better technology that are, again, relying and leveraging those agentic capabilities? But in the same time, the same breath, how do we govern and control and secure those type of systems? Because their unique attributes and characteristics are so different that they do require new sets of controls and safeguards in order for CISOs from around the world to feel confident about allowing the deployment and operation of those agentic capabilities and the applications that rely on those agentic capabilities. So, and we can get into that and what that actually entailed. But I believe that if we'll sort of revisit the two streams we're talking about, those two streams have, from my perspective, have materially changed. Right now, it's not just about using AI to automate. Right now, we're talking about the ability to replace processes that until recently could only be conducted by human beings, right. and addressing some of the bottlenecks that have hindered or impeded the progress of cybersecurity in larger organizations, right? Because there is just a limited amount of human beings, of eyeballs, that can go through unmanageable amount of alerts or findings, as an example. And in the same time, the other stream, we need to think about, how are we going to secure technologies that are basically, I'm referring to AI agents, although that might change in the autonomous future, right? How are we going to secure, agents or agentic capabilities that are omnicompetent, that are non-deterministic, that are autonomous, as mentioned, that are opaque? It's a whole new ball game, and we'll see how the industry. I think this is the new call to action, right? If humanity's or society's new mission is to embed agency, then the cybersecurity community's new mission is to see how we can secure that new type of agency wherever it might reside.
And I think such an interesting observation here is that where a lot of what's happening with agentic systems is helping humans be superhumans by effectively telling the humans that they can do less. We can do less with more. We can do more with less. That means that replacing a lot of these human processes with technological processes with agents And I think that, on one hand, the way we've dealt cybersecurity wise with human processes is both putting the guardrails, but one of those guardrails has been training and awareness, for example. And we've been spending a lot of time considering what do we need to teach our humans to do or how to behave in a secure manner, while putting relevant guardrails that some of them are also very relevant to the humans themselves. Now, when we take the human out of the loop and we put in an agent, I think that you're creating, first of all, a gap that needs to be filled.
Right.
How do you secure that process now? Because that process has never existed before. You relied on human intuition, on training and awareness, or human processes. But once we do fill that gap, I think that the level of maturity of our defensive systems will only rise, because now we have a more deterministic approach to security. We're not reliant on humans anymore in that context, and we know that humans are the weakest link and where their vulnerabilities are being used. And so I think that we're in an interesting inflection point where we're seeing this mass adoption of agents. I think that we're just starting to see that adoption in the enterprise world of agentic systems across workflows. And as soon as those get embedded, we're going to start seeing those big gaps, and whoever will be able to look at how to secure these agentic workflows. And as you mentioned, they're opaque, they're diverse, they're non-deterministic. I think that's a really interesting question, even just from an observability perspective.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of issues to reckon with and to consider as we are sort of striving into this sort of new domain. Definitely.
Yeah, and I bet we're seeing categories that have evolved over the last, like NHIs, for example, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the context of permission management and access, right? I think that's just one layer.
Yeah. So so I think that's a great point. So think about identity in the sort of in the agentic context, right? So an agent could have certain permissions that are more granular, that are more permissive, that are more excessive than those of the human being that actually triggered that workflow that includes that agent. It might be the other way around. It might have less permissions,
we'll
right?
Have both.
Might have both. We might have ephemeral permissions, right? Because the agent doesn't necessarily need that permission throughout the process.
Yes.
Those permissions might change over time because the mission statement of that agent might change, right? And in many cases, so some say, well, it's quite an easy, the solution is right in front of our eyes. The agent just need to inherit the permissions of the human being that triggered that workflow. But one has to consider the fact that in the future, you'll also have ambient agents that are triggered automatically.
Yes.
So what is that source that the agent can derive from in terms of understanding what type of permissions are most required to fulfill that objective? So I think the issue of identity is quite fluid. I would even go as far as saying that identity would be sort of a tool that is used or it is leveraged by an agent for that specific task in that specific context. And I wouldn't say that the agent's main attribute or main characteristic is its identity. I think it's part of the sort of the problem statement, right? It's part of what we need to consider as we go through, forming those type of security solutions. But I think that this is just one narrow prism into that world. Yeah.
So what gets you really excited about the state that we're in with cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think there's so many. Again, there's always a surge in demand for cybersecurity. I remember that when I started sort of presenting delivering like sort of lectures about cybersecurity and about Israel's origins of success, how we sort of became a sort of a powerhouse in cybersecurity. There was a slide there that referred to J.P. Morgan's cybersecurity budget. And I do remember that it was something I think it was around $500 million or so. And I shared that just to demonstrate the type of attention, the type of resources that are allocated to address this issue, because it's such an important issue that any board has to sort of reckon with. And I was on the panel yesterday. I was with a friend of mine who works for JP Morgan, and she mentioned that we're already at around $5 billion in terms of security budget. I might be paraphrasing. It might be that example, but around that figure. So you're seeing that it's the same trajectory. It's always surging. The demand is always there because there is an inherent asymmetry in cyberspace,
yes.
right? The attacker will always be one step ahead of the defender, just because how the board, right, is laid out. The defender has to protect all of its assets all the time, across the board, wherever they may reside. It's their, premise have already extended to the cloud, to remote work, to bring your own devices. Non-employees are able to sort of engage with companies. The whole landscape has changed so materially, so that just makes everything much more complicated for the defender in cyberspace. Moreover, it's getting more complex, right? Because you have more tools, you have more data. The abundance of data, the complexity of your architecture doesn't always work to your advantage. It's the other way around. So a lot of CISOs these days are concentrating on simplification, automation, right? That's where AI perhaps could be of assistance. And the attacker, on the other hand, I'm really simplifying it, just need to succeed once, right? Need to circumvent those defenses. Usually they can operate unfortunately, with no impunity, with very low barriers to entry. With the proliferation of cyber weapons, it's an unfair, it's sort of like a rigged game, right? So there is always a demand for cybersecurity tools. As new technologies are being introduced, as there are more abstraction in the enterprise estate, as things are just getting more complex and more fragmented, as you mentioned, security becomes a necessity. So there is always new topics, new domains to sort of new challenges to address. By the way, one aspect that usually is not frequently raised in this type of discussions is the regulatory environment, right? It's fragmented, and there is a widening gap between governments' willingness to regulate themselves, to regulate organizations that are working within their jurisdiction, and that widening gap, that disharmony between different regulations, create gaps, and that coerce companies to now tailor solutions for specific jurisdictions and take into consideration things that they wouldn't necessarily consider when they deploy new technologies around the world, and that might create new opportunities for cybersecurity companies, but it also might coerce cybersecurity companies to now adjust their solution and customize their solution for each and every specific use case. So I think that just in terms of the regulatory compliance landscape, it's that just yet another aspect that has to be addressed, and that's why there is so much commotion about cybersecurity these days. Yeah,
and I think we're just getting started.
Yeah, definitely. We haven't even, if we had this discussion a week ago, we would probably have a completely different discussion. But now I think it's a bit, we can't ignore the big wizard in the room, right? The acquisition of Wiz by Google is a watershed moment for the entire industry, but of course for the Israeli cybersecurity ecosystem. I foresee that, I foresee, again, as Niels Bohr said, predictions are hard, especially about the future. So I'm not sure that I'm ready to make a this type of strong prediction, but I'll try anyway. I think we're going to see the proverbial Cambrian explosion of new startups in the coming years in Israel. If you thought that Israel's ecosystem is flourishing because we've been attracting around 30% of venture capital funds into Israel, we haven't seen anything yet. You haven't seen anything yet. The amount of capital is going to flow back to the Israeli industry. You all know about the type of the founders of Wiz have always been role models for entrepreneurs, and they have already cemented their position as role models. But I think that they also cultivated a culture of paying it forward, and they've always supported the ecosystem. And I think that everyone who worked at Wiz will keep on supporting the ecosystem, and the capital that will flow into the industry will, as we know from other use cases of the past, usually flows back to the industry to fund new startups, to fund new venture capital and new financial vehicles that support those startups. And you'll see an influx of battle-tested practitioners that have hands-on experience, managerial experience, both experience from one of the fastest growing companies in history, as well as one of the biggest companies ever, one of the tech titans. That combination will create, I believe, a new sort of batch, a new cohort, a new wave of amazing entrepreneurs, and I'm really excited to see what will happen next in the cybersecurity industry.
Cannot wait.
Yeah,
this was such a fun conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here, and such an exciting times for all of us, for Israel, for the world, for cyber, for AI. Really pleasure sharing this stage with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
It's a gift.